All right, good morning. This is Robin Howe, and I'm with the elementary team at the Montessori School of Erbil, and this is day two. Yesterday we started with a conversation on language, and then it sort of evolved into a more practical conversation about um, how to start a school year, both on site, and then how to translate that into this online and blended learning. That the situation in Erbil is a little different than it is in the United States, and that they are not allowed to open yet. So we started a conversation towards the end of yesterday, and we thought that today we would continue a conversation of discussing more practical matters of how to do things. And so we were just before we started recording talking about blended learning, and so we're going to pick up the conversation there. And so what was the question we were just getting ready to ask?
Yeah, actually yesterday I asked the teacher to send me the questions, and yeah, today I received a few of them. And then I will start with uh, Lamia's question. Yeah, Michael, Michael,
Yes.
Michael, can you hear me? Yeah,
Yeah. Hi.
from Sylvain. Shall I restart? Okay, from Sylvain. Robin, yeah, the first question is from Sylvain. She are asking about what are changes. No, Montessori gives a free environment to students to learn. So what's the approach to discipline in the Montessori classroom? So if I understand well, because you know that Montessori is grouping the students, and sometimes we are facing that from one kids in the group, they are not following the structure or not doing, for example, the task they're assigned to. In this case, what can we do? Let them to do whatever he want, or what?
So you brought up something called discipline, and then I'm going to sort of reframe it with a couple different terms: natural consequences, and freedom. This concept of freedom within limits. So one of the common misconceptions about Montessori is that children have free range, right? So they think, okay, we're supposed to give them options, so that means they can do whatever they want. That is not what was intended. And so I want to just reframe the way we think about options. You can have an option between A, B, and C, but that does not mean you have options between A, B, 1, 2, black, white. It doesn't mean you have options to do everything you want. It doesn't mean you have options. So when you're talking about things like follow-up work, and I know many of you are new to Montessori, so let me explain what follow-up work is. Follow-up work is the work that you give to a student following a lesson, or following the new introduction of a concept. So if you give a lesson to your students, whether it's a whole group lesson, individual lesson, or a small group lesson, and you give them follow-up work, my strong suggestion is to give them options. So it could be, if we're doing, I'm just trying to think of a concept. If we're doing dynamic geography, and we're talking about plate tectonics, and Alfred Wegener, who is the person that came up with the theory of plate tectonics, what I want them to do with their follow-up work is I want them to do something that is not meant to be rote and boring, but do something that demonstrates they understand the concepts. It could be draw a picture, it could be create a model out of clay, it could be write up a summary, but they don't have an option to just be like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do anything. What you can do is say, here are the three options, and if you have a fourth option, please explain it to me. But you don't just give them free reign of just doing whatever they want. You can't say I wouldn't suggest saying to a kid, here's the lesson, do whatever you want to show me, because that is almost too much freedom. And what ends up happening when it comes to work is that the focus becomes trying to figure out what the follow-up work is, not the actual work. And so you have to look at things like discipline and behavior the same way in the classroom. If you have expectations, and one of the things I want to go back and talk about is the beginning of the year, but if you go back, to behavior you in the beginning of the year, and you're giving them clear guidelines of what acceptable behavior it is, you know, it could be that if they're not working, they can read, they can have snack, but it is not an option to go chase your friend around the classroom. It is not an option to go stick your friend with a pencil. Those are not options. So even within the behavior, they have to make choices, and they have choices, but they're not to do whatever you want. And then when it gets to punitive behavior, if a child is not doing work, then anything that you have to do is figure out what is an acceptable amount of unproductivity that you can handle. What I mean by that is, so if a child is just sort of sitting there and not working, that's different than sitting there and watching other children work. It's also different than running around disturbing.
Yeah, disturbing student. Yeah.
Yes. So you in your own classrooms have to figure out what the difference is. When children start acting destructively, what I mean by destructively is like they could be breaking material and not disrupting anybody else. That's where you have to step in. It could be that they're disrupting other students. That's when you have to step in. And disturbing students does not just mean like bothering them. Disturbing students means pulling them from what they're supposed to be doing, right? But I also want to come back to something we talked about yesterday with those 4 planes of development. At the second plane, where you all are elementary teachers, part of the work of the child is learning their social roles. So it is not abnormal. I would actually encourage them to be social, but that's different than being social and disruptive. So the difference, in my opinion, especially at the elementary level, is you can have 4 kids working at a table and they can be talking, but the question is, are they still producing work?
Yeah.
And so that, in my opinion, is one of the differences of elementary and primary. And the primary level, kids are still being social, and that's important. But often you'll see primary kids, so primary being 3 to 6, working on their own, really focusing on spooning or scooping or whatever the work is. Whereas at the elementary level, you'll often see kids working on their follow-up work or working on a journal or whatever it is, or working together, and they're talking, but they're still being productive. So you all as teachers have to figure out where you draw the line. And when kids are falling outside of acceptable behaviors, that's when you have to step in. And then getting back to the actual question of discipline, in Montessori, we don't do things to be punitive. So we certainly don't hit kids, and we don't scream at kids. I mean, that's an important piece. It is a natural inclination to raise our voice, right? You know, like to say, Samir, what are you doing? I've already told you 3 times not to do that, right? A challenge of a Montessori teacher is to remember that you're the teacher, they are the student, that you are the adult. They may have control, but for whatever reason, it's not working. So what you have to do is you need to put in boundaries, or you need to try to put in boundaries that will change the behavior. And that goes back to what I talked about yesterday. If a child is constantly wandering around the classroom, disrupting other students, a couple things need to happen. 1, you need to find a way to engage that student. And 2, it may be that you have to give them more structure. You may say that, okay, Shalal, I see that you've been wandering around all morning. What are you working on? And then he says, and then common answer is, I don't know what to do. Okay, so let's look at your work planner. Let me help you pick out some work. And then you, the teacher, are helping them make that choice. And it may get more and more structured to say, okay, if you can't come up with any ideas and you don't want to do any of these works, I'm going to tell you that from 8 o'clock until 8:30, I want you to work on these 4 math problems. And I want you to do it here. So you're going to be giving them additional structure until they can demonstrate they learned it. But the big thing that you as teachers want to help your children understand is that you're not doing this because you're upset with them or you're trying to do it to be punitive. like punitive meaning you're in trouble. You don't want them to start self-identifying as being in trouble. You want to really use language that helps them understand that what you're trying to do is give them the tools or the structure to be successful. So that's an example. Now, going back to discipline, there are, of course, things that need much stronger discipline. If a child is being verbally abusive, that's a different animal. If a child is being physically abusive to another child or teacher, that's different. And as Montessorians, you absolutely do not want to allow that for a couple reasons. One, somebody could get hurt, right? But also as teachers, if you are allowing a child to do those sorts of behaviors, it's adversely affecting the rest of the classroom. It's taking time away, it's taking the teacher away from the rest of the students. So if you're dealing with a really troubling behavior, that means the other children are not getting instruction. It's disrupting the other children, and it's also setting an example. So in the case of really sort of behaviors that you think are outside of the realm of being redirected, that's when you need to get an administrator involved. You need to get parents involved. If you have special service, like if you have services like, I want to say like a social worker or a therapist, get them involved. So, so if you have a kid that's every day hitting other kids, you can't allow that. And so again, maybe day one you try to redirect it, but if it continues to happen and your interventions aren't working, you get other people involved, and ultimately, it may not be the right place for them. As a school, you all need to be prepared for the idea that some children just aren't going to make it. And the unfortunate thing is people will say, well, Montessori should be for everyone. And I get that. But if a child has needs that are outside of what we feel like we can provide, that may be just numbers of teachers. Like it may be that a student would do fine if they had a one-on-one paraprofessional, but if we don't have those resources and it's hurting the class, we need to find those resources.
Triska.
I just muted her.
Mute, please, Triska.
I did it.
Yes, Miss Nermi.
Mute your mic, please, because I'm hearing a noise.
No, I muted. Just now I unmuted.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that is okay. It's come noisy. This okay. Yeah, okay. Sorry, Robin. Continue.
No.
It was really very useful, very informative information, because this is the main point that all the teachers are facing the problem while grouping, because it's really very important and it was really informative. Am I right, teachers?
Sure.
Yeah. So I believe, yeah, it's really very useful. Yeah. Continue, Robin.
Yeah. So that's how we deal with this one. I mean, getting other administrators involved, getting teachers involved, getting specialists involved. But one of the points that you brought up yesterday, which sort of deviated from our original conversation, but we might as well talk about it, is how do you start a school year to get children to behave differently? And so I'm going to spend some time talking to you all about that. But also want to remember that, right now, until we open school, things are different, right? So, how do you get kids to behave online is a whole different question, right?
Yeah.
So yesterday we talked about, the beginning of the school year. So in a normal school year, when we have students come in, it's going to be different than how we're starting online. And then we also talked yesterday about the fact that in a traditional Montessori school, you have classrooms where the teachers are there all day, and then you have the same group of kids, same teachers. So what that does is that makes it really easy to have understanding of expectations between students and teachers. It gets more complicated in your case, not through any fault of your own, but because you have an English teacher coming in and then going out, and then you have a math teacher coming in and going out. So it's really important on your end to make sure that all the teachers are on the same page, right? So it has to be that the teachers understand, for example, what we just talked about, that they're not going to scream at kids and put them in timeout, but that they're going to work to redirect kids in a similar way. But what you would historically do in an elementary classroom on that very first day is you would, the kids are arriving, then you bring them down for a class meeting, right? So the kids are all there together. On those first days, you don't really focus on academics too much, but you really focus on activities and helping the children understand expectations of behavior. So imagine again a classroom where now you have, let's call it 25 children. And again, remember, in most traditional classrooms or Montessori classrooms, 2/3 of the students are returning. That's a big key for you all. So if you have a group of first through third graders, the second and third graders would have been in that Montessori classroom either last year or the last 2 years. So they're going to understand what the expectations are. So you bring them together and you talk about things. Maybe you ask the children to introduce themselves and share their names and one fun thing they did over the summer. Then come up with an activity that's not academic. And what you want to do in having these activities is have them do things in the classroom and move and discuss and use appropriate behavior. So again, if you've talked about at that meeting, like, we're going to do a personality scavenger hunt. What that means is, again, nothing academic. You're going to find somebody who's, went to visit Disneyland over the summer. I'm saying this will be different from where you are. Went to visit Disneyland, has a dog, has an older brother, has easy stuff. And so they're going to have the opportunity to move about the classroom and talk to people throughout the classroom using behavior that's expected. So again, you're going to say to kids, okay, kids, when you do this, you're going to be walking through the classroom. You're going to be using your indoor voices. And so then you're going to have an activity. And then you may have another activity that, again, does the same thing. Because what you really want to do is start helping them use that behavior all the time. And then you can have another activity that asks them to find space at a table or on a rug. And we're going to, we're going to spend 20 minutes writing about what you hope to, learn this summer or something like that. But again, it's an opportunity for them to do work, and you're telling them explicitly what your expectations are. So for this time, for these next 15 minutes, while I want you working on this, I want you to, sit at either your table or the rug, or if you want to sit outside, that's fine. And then when you come back to circle, I'm going to ask you to share what you wrote with the rest of the class. So again, then you're back in circle, and the kids are again practicing the behavior of sitting in circle, sitting quietly. And again, are kids going to be perfect? No. And so if a child is sitting in circle and messing with their neighbor, a first discreet reminder, Samir, please stop bothering Sivan. Okay. And if he does it again, then again, if he does it again, then I'm not taking him and putting him out. I said, Sivan, please come sit over near me. So I've moved you. And then again, if they're continuing to do it, be like, Sivan, again, you're not trying to make an example out of them, but you're just giving them natural consequences and trying to help them have the support they need. So it may be that, they're going to sit at a table while everybody else is sitting at the circle. But again, so those first couple of days, you want to have many activities that give them the opportunity to use behavior. And you may put out, in your case, it may be that you're putting out non-Montessori materials and that they can just use. And you're saying, like, if you have 20 kids in your class and you have 20 different things they can do, you can say, all right, I want you to go choose something and just prep and sit at your table or on the floor, and you can do it wherever you want, but I want you to work on it. And then let them all get up and have a chance. And so the idea is, hopefully, they're all working on things independently, or it could even be together. It could be a 2-person thing, but they're all working on different things independently as a single person or as a group. And that's really what you want to do to sort of set the tone for the classroom for the year. Yeah. And so you also want to do, at the beginning of the school year, a lot of, especially at the elementary level, because they get it, a lot of role play. And what I mean by role play is, if you're doing something, if you have a co-teacher, you can obviously do this with them. But if not, you can do it with a student, where you literally explicitly show them what your expectations are of behavior. So if you're trying to demonstrate to them how to solve how to solve a disagreement over where they're sitting or what material. You want to role play with the child or with the other person to show them the right way to do things. And again, that includes the language you use, the tone of your language, the way your body structure is, right? And again, you do a lot of that towards the beginning of the year.
Yeah, good ideas. Yeah, this is good idea, teachers. We have we have to figure out what kind of subject. Each teachers have to choose a subject or concept, then choose to start the lessons. For example, every class teacher or a subject teacher find own way. So it was really very informative. And second question is, if there is no exam or assessment in Montessori, so how do they assess the progress of students? This is also question important, yeah.
Yes. Okay, so assessment, not just in Erbil, but in Montessori, is a really interesting topic. And this is actually a topic that there's a need for more literature and more research and more discussion, because Montessorians historically, so I want to backtrack because I know Montessori is new to you. Montessori is the largest independent, non-traditional method of education in the world. Okay, to become a Montessori teacher and to become a credentialed Montessori teacher, you have to do a year to a year and a half of graduate level work. So Montessori teachers, if you have a regular teacher and then you have a Montessori teacher, a lot of us are the same thing. I've done work at public schools. They are not mutually exclusive. But many Montessorians think that just because we have an emphasis on, and we say no testing, which I actually disagree with, that we don't assess. We are constantly assessing. So as Montessorians in a classroom, and again, I know that your classrooms aren't quite there yet, and it will take time to get to a point that I'm talking about, but as Montessorians, you do assess and you use different types of assessment. The first type of assessment I want to sort of explain to you is something called authentic assessment. Authentic assessment is an academically recognized type of assessment. The type of authentic assessment that we do mostly as Montessorians is observation, okay? So in most situations, and again, I'm not speaking about most Montessori classrooms, you want to be able to get to a point where your children are independent enough that you can take some time to observe as a teacher. What that looks like, well, there are a couple different models. There is a traditional model where you literally have an observation chair. So imagine your classroom, imagine the scenario we just talked about where all the kids are working on different things. And then if you can, you take you literally step back from the classroom, not outside the classroom, but literally find a separate area where you can, on your laptop or on a notebook, sit back and observe what they're doing. The challenge is for the Montessori teachers, you want to be as subjective as possible. So you don't want to say, oh, it looks like Jessica is having fun because she's laughing and smiling, right? What you want to do is, okay, is she working? How is she working? Is she using the material correctly? And again, ideally you would have time throughout each day to sort of watch each kid and observe what they're doing. Look at how they're using the materials. Look at take a look at your big picture of your classroom. If you're sitting back and observing and you have 20 kids, you can do a quick head count and say, okay, 15 of my kids are engaged, 5 children aren't. Now, the 5 children are these 5 children. So a couple things that you could do from that observation, the data points is, how do I try to move forward from those 15 students? Or if I observe over a course of a couple days and I see it's always the same 5 kids, what do I have to do to get these children to engage? So you want to use observation as a data collection tool. That's one sort of assessment. The other forms of assessment are, basically a summative assessment, which means like at the end of the year, you give them something that basically evaluates the whole body of work they've learned. And in Montessori, we generally steer away from this because what most summative assessments look like are end-of-year tests. We don't want to do that in many cases because it becomes what we call a high-stakes test. we don't want to give our students a test at the end of the year and say, okay, if you pass it, you go on to the next grade. If you don't pass it, you stay. And I'll tell you why in a minute. One of the challenges you all have is you have a state mandated test, right? Yes. So in your case, unfortunately, you have to do what the state tells you to do.
Yeah.
So the best that you can do is try to prepare them for that test in the most Montessori way possible. And again, so it's like, is that Montessori? No. But do you have to do it? Yes. So rather than sit here and say, oh, that's horrible, I think what we need to do is say, okay, if that is indeed the situation we're in, what is the best way to handle it? So we'll come back and talk about that. So that's summative assessment, which is not usually used, especially at the younger levels. But I will say that as our children get older, I do think giving them summative assessments is important, even if they're not high stakes. The reason I believe that is because as they progress through middle and high school, whether it's at a Montessori school or otherwise, they are going to be having more and more summative type assessments. So I do think that giving it to them, maybe not at first grade, but as they sort of get older, giving more to them just to expose them to the exercise. But what we can do differently is not say, okay, if you pass this, you're going on, and if you don't, you stay. That we can change, but I think it's important to do. What we can also do as Montessorians is say, is there a summative project? Is there a summative essay that really appeals to your interest or something you can write about? So we can do summative assessment differently. But the main way that Montessorians assess students.
Project-based learning, just like that.
Yeah, something like that. But the way that most Montessorians do things, especially at the elementary level, is through observation and then also the body of work that children are producing. So if I'm presenting lessons with Montessori materials, right, and then the children are being asked to use those materials to come up with either write products, or use it to come up with a final solution. So if I'm trying to teach them again how to use the racks and tubes, which is for division, if they use that material and come up with the right answer, or if they're recording their work and coming up with the right answer, I, as the teacher, want to regularly evaluate both the use of the material and the written work they're doing to see if they're coming up with the right answer. And that is how I can evaluate whether or not they're doing it correctly. Now, using material as an example, Montessori materials are really useful because they are the concrete apparatus that demonstrate the concept. Especially as, excuse me, in elementary level, as they progress through the curriculum, the goal is to use the material and then move towards what we call abstraction. So first is introducing the material, using the material, then there's using the material and recording the answer, and then ultimately we want them to, when they are ready, and only when they are ready, when they've demonstrated mastery of the material, to move towards doing it abstractly. So then the evaluative tool is being able to do the work abstractly and come up with the right answer. So all of that will yield work that we as the teacher can evaluate. That's a good example. Like math is a great example for that. But then there are also things like writing. You know, we want to regularly look at the work they're producing. And again, this is differentiated by child and by level. We want to look at their work, and we don't want to necessarily mark every error in there because, again, we don't want to discourage them from writing, but we want to, as we're teaching them concepts, capital letters, proper nouns, basically why you use capital letters for proper nouns. We want them then to see in their writing and in their examples that they are using these concepts. And so it may not be that in their writing we're gonna address every comma and every period and every piece of punctuation, but we want to look at the body of work. And ideally, in every Montessori classroom, you have something that serves as a portfolio, a collection of their work. So you as the teacher want to be able to say, okay, we started the school year in September and we were getting work back, we were evaluating it and giving it back and getting redirection, and then we're keeping it, or they're keeping it. And then by the middle of the year, we want to see progress. And certainly by the end of the year, we want to be able to look back and say, okay, here's the math they were doing now at the end of the year in August. Now let's look at back what they were doing in September. Have they made progress? Same thing with writing. Have they made progress? You know, and again, an assessment. So, I mean, that is a type of assessment that you can do that does not include quizzes or exams, right?
Yeah, agree.
So again, you're
very nice.
Constantly evaluating. And again, the only other thing I would add to that is when you're thinking about assessment, outside of state mandated testing, sorry, I cough more when I'm talking loudly.
Yeah, it's dry throat, maybe drinking tea.
Oh yeah, well, that's why it
happened to me when I then
well, also
try to drink.
In Utah's a desert, and it's up in the mountains. So we're at about 5,000 feet. It hasn't rained in about 2 months, and we actually have fires. And between the mountains, there's bad air.
Oh.
I mean, it's beautiful.
I see very blue sky behind you. Yeah.
Well, that's funny, and that's also between. Well, it's not even bright out.
Very clear. Normally, I said okay.
No, I mean it's
amazing.
It's beautiful. I'll take you outside before we finish up today and show you. But I was saying one other thing. Oh yes, I want you all to remember that again, when you're assessing these kids, the goal is not necessarily assessing them against other people. You don't want, if you are looking at a first grader or a fourth grader, I would strongly suggest as much as you can within your system to not say, okay, he's here and he's there, but what you want to look at is, are they all making progress? And also remembering, so it may be that if one fourth grader is here and one fourth grader is here, that they're each going up rather than they both have to get to the same place.
Yeah.
Because if you have a highly performing fourth grader in math, right? If you have a kid that's really excellent at math, he may be operating at a sixth grade level. Your goal is not just to keep him here because he's already met the standards. Your goal is to help these children that have aptitudes do the best they can. So a goal of that sixth grader who's 2 years ahead is to continue to get up to eighth grade level, whereas the fourth grader that's at second grade, it may just be to try to make progress. So you want to, as teachers, you want to help your children that are really good in certain areas keep on growing and help try to enhance that area of strength while also addressing the weaker areas. And also remember that many children will be great in one area and not great in another. The common example is you often have children that are really good at math, but may really struggle in language arts. So you want to treat those subjects differently. You want to help them go faster with math because they're able to, and then you may want to slow things down in language. Okay, so it's really, I mean, when we talk about a differentiated instruction, which is a common term in Montessori, we're not just talking about differentiated per child. We're talking about differentiated per child, per subject area.
Yeah. Thank you for this. And the other question is, Montessori program could be challenging and frustrating for the children who want to do things their own way, who don't easily follow instruction, which we can see this a lot with our students, especially the ones that are not in Montessori from beginning. So what we should do with them? Actually, it's related to the same explanation that you did with the discipline who is not following, but maybe you had extra things. Slivan?
Yeah, that's correct. He answered that question with the same.
Yeah, he answered already. Yeah, already the same, because I realized when I read your question, he answered already. So I think if you have another question, so no, I believe that no need to explain it more because he answered already.
Yes, okay. Thank you so much. You did.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you to Mr. Robin. Lamia, you sent your question. Yeah. Yeah. Lamia's question: what kind of activities from Montessori theory can be used to teach math and science, and how to apply it when we have students with different levels?
Okay, so at the elementary level, and again, I know that this is not, I'm speaking as if you were a fully implemented Montessori program. So again, remember, I know your classrooms don't have the full battery of materials. They're not set up like full Montessori classrooms yet. But when they're at
like that? Montessori? Is it like that? I believe, I don't know, because all the material that Zinar, because you are the first teacher, correct me if I'm wrong, because as I told you, Robin, I joined the school and end of February. So I thought that all the material that Montessori using there, we have it at school. So I see a lot of materials for math, so is it not complete?
Well, I think you guys have complete sets, unless things have changed. But one of the challenges is because you have grades broken up by, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, there are a lot of, like in a Montessori classroom, you would have all of those materials in the same classroom, right? So that way the third, fourth, and fifth graders, you may have a fourth grader that needs to use, use something, and you'd have a lot of carryover. You'd have some material that's in the first or third grade in the fourth through sixth grade. So unless things have changed, that's not the way the setup is yet. And there are a lot of, what I can do,
Mr. Robin, can I, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry for interruption, but can I ask a question I really wanted, because you visited our school and you see in each class we have around 10 to 15. I'm talking about elementary, like from grade 1 to grade 6. We have maximum around 7, 8, some classes 10, 15, pieces, like different pieces, and most of them are about math. We don't have science. We cannot find any science material for grade 1, 2, 3, 4. And language is not too much. We have some math, but my question is, how many materials do we need to have it in our, in a standard Montessori class? How many minimum? Let's talk about minimum.
I don't know the exact answer of how many, but the other thing is too, is usually you would have multiples of some materials as well. So for example, you would have 3 stamp games. It's because the idea is some children may be working on the same thing at the same time.
Yeah, they wanted to work, for example.
So
two groups wanted to play the same activity, and we had one only. I had one stamp game and one checkerboard in my classroom.
Yeah, and so again, and the way I've seen it happen before is where sometimes you have, kids taking turns with the teacher, and if you're giving a lesson, that's not bad. But if you're giving the follow-up work, that's when you see a lot of behavior issues, when kids are supposed to be doing something, but there's not enough to do. So again, this is to equip a Montessori classroom. Again, remember, usually you have 3-year cycles together, is different. So you'd have, I'm trying to think of a number here, 50, 60, 70 different pieces of material. And the other thing is, a lot of things like science and history are not as much about the material, is about the impressionistic lesson. So for example, at the upper elementary level, 4th through 6th grade, in a traditional Montessori classroom, you use what are called impressionistic charts. So, and I don't believe you have those at all. And a lot of Montessori schools here actually don't do it correctly. But the impressionistic charts are used by the teacher to show a concept that then is taught by the teacher. So for example, when I talked about plate tectonics earlier in Alfred Wegener, that is a lesson that you give to upper elementary children. And it's not a material. There's an experiment that you can do. So there are a lot of experiments that you show them to demonstrate the concept. So in this particular lesson, before I show them a chart, I have 2 pieces of paper. So imagine you have 2 pieces of paper that are overlapped like this, right? So my hands are paper. What should I have? These napkins that I have here. You have 2 pieces of paper. You have sand or dirt on top, right? So can everybody imagine sand on top? It looks like one mound of dirt. As I move them away, what happens to the dirt? There's a valley that forms in between, right? And then you end up with two different piles. So that may be the introductory lesson. And what I'm trying to do is show them, so these 2 napkins in my case represent the moving plates of the earth. And so I'm just trying to give them an impressionistic idea of what happens. And then I get into the actual lesson. And so then if I'm teaching that lesson, I'm showing them the chart. I may have a separate book that I use where, I'm actually showing them a picture of the scientist that came up with this. So as they get older and older, a lot of these history and science lessons become experiments, experiences, and use of external resources. So in the upper elementary history curriculum that I taught, it was a lot like, well, I'll go back a little bit with science. So we talked yesterday about the great lessons, the story of life, the story of the universe, the story of humans, and the story of life. So we're teaching, and I said everything under the elementary curriculum fits within that. So our science curriculum is looking at geography, geology, planetary studies, sort of doing studies of the planets. We're looking at the atmosphere. Then we're getting into different parts of the Earth, different structures on the Earth. And there's a lot of nomenclature card, and nomen meaning naming, in elementary curriculum. So they're literally learning parts of volcanoes, parts of mountains, parts of rivers. And so you all are missing, I believe, a lot of that work. At the early childhood level, you have, and you can still use this at the elementary level, I think you have landforms, right? Mm-hmm. So you're trying to teach them landforms, but at the elementary level, you're doing that, but much more in depth. And then you start getting into things like the timeline of life, which I don't know you have, which is literally a timeline of first life all the way up to humans. And that brings up a whole separate issue with your school, which I'll talk about in a minute. But again, so at the elementary level, you're doing earth science, you're studying how the earth formed. Because remember, the earth was not, always here. And again, and then you get into the upper elementary, you continue along that study, but get more and more in depth, doing studies of different types of trees and different types of plants, and then different types of animals. You're learning about the classification system. But in your school, and this is meant to be a really open-ended question, so please excuse my ignorance. Are you all in Kurdistan, as a predominantly Muslim country, are you able to teach evolution and earth science?
Yes, it's normal. Like we are studying in university, and it is normal for all of us. And we have different thoughts about it. Yeah, it's totally normal for us.
Okay, so yes, I mean, because a lot of
what we do normally, Robin, so because we don't have that material, for example, if we teach volcano and kinds of volcano, for example, this is type, then because we don't have that material, sometimes we are just doing very small experiment, but normally we show them a video about the kind of volcano, how it happens. And for example, La Palma is one of the volcano that in Spain that happens, it's dark because of the type volcano. So mostly in science, we show them video. And for simple things, if we're talking about mixture, if we're talking about some simple reaction, we're doing inside the class and let the student to see it, obviously. So, but the material, for example, if we are talking about body or digestive system, so we don't have that material to show them. But what we do, first I show them a video explaining that's a digestive system, starting from mouth, blah, 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 blah. And respiratory system, all the science concept, we try to explain it with the help of video. Is it okay?
So there are a couple of answers. And again, my answer is just my answer. But I think that is a great solution. And again, we have to be realistic right now that you all only have what you have.
Yeah.
You all, I mean, again, as I've told to Sangar and Shalal, this is going to be a multi-year process to really fully implement Montessori. Because of limitations of what we're allowed to do within the government, right? Yeah. In terms of testing and grades, and also just in terms of resources. So again, there's a difference I'll say this, and I feel pretty strongly about this. There's a difference between using technology and videos to be educational concepts. So again, you can find wonderful, wonderful videos on volcanoes. You can find great videos on Alfred Wegener. So it could be that you're introducing them to a concept that they can just show you things that you can't show. an important piece as your kids get older and older in the elementary program is having discussion after the experience. And so I feel good about using videos if they're the right videos. That is a big difference than putting on videos to entertain.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
So like, and I've done this before, I think I don't remember if I've ever seen this in Kurdistan, but I've seen it in many schools that are calling themselves Montessori schools, where they have, in the primary class, not the primary, in the, toddler, and even the primary class, they have cartoons on. And what they're doing is they are entertaining kids. And the reason why they're entertaining kids is because they're trying to deal with behavior. Yeah. That's not a solution. What we need to do is find ways to actively engage the children's mind at all levels. So if we're using videos to entertain versus videos to supplement curriculum, those are two different things. Now, in terms of talking about something that really ought to be part of your routine as elementary teachers is the higher order thinking question. So I'm going to say it again, higher order thinking question. So, and this looks different for different areas of curriculum, but let's say, for example, you're teaching history of Kurdistan, right?
Yeah.
Rather than saying, what is the capital? What was the date they were followed? Really trying to ask them, like, looking at the geography and try to understand, why would Erbil be a capital? What is it about our geographic setup? We have rivers or we have lakes. Why did people settle here? Or when you're talking about the digestive system, not just what is this called, but asking them to think of things and then engaging them to come up with their own questions too. So as you're giving these lessons, whenever possible, try to think of questions that really ask them to think.
Oh, yeah, this is critical thinking method. This is really very useful, yeah.
And so again, if you're
this is good that we can, this is good to hear that we can use this video in order to support the subject. Okay, there are other questions, Lamia, I'm sorry.
I want to share one other thing too. I also, as a teacher, and I haven't been a teacher like in a classroom for kids now in, I don't know, 7 years or something like that. But I collected as part of my routine, I collected resources that I use on my own. So like if I went to a museum and I found a great book on the evolution of humans, I would buy that book and I would use that book during my lessons. And so I would, if I'm showing the difference between, the skull of of Homo heidelbergensis versus Homo neanderthalensis, and I want to show them the different sizes of the forebrain, I'm using that book to show them. And then when I'm done with the lesson and they have their follow-up work, I'm putting that book on the shelf and they're using that book as a resource to do their own research. So I often used books, and I would always keep an eye out for resources, posters, rocks, whatever it was that I could use in my lessons.
Yeah, now this year we have a plan to make a group or individual presentation. What does it mean? That we put points or many topic. The kids, they have to choose the topic to talk about it and gather information about it. For example, the kids, do you want to talk about lion or tiger or what? And then they have to search about information about lion and what kinds of animal, and they have to come in front of the class to give a presentation about what's lion. And we will not evaluate the kids about the content he gathered or she gathered. We will evaluate the kids of the way of presenting the information, whether making eye contact, whether just like shy or just like not able to talk. So this is just like, because we are suffering from this kind of things when we talk to someone. So we're trying to put this method this year. So I think that it's really very useful. And to support that, we have to purchase many books. It could be about philosophy, about geography, science. It could be concept that the student or kids, they would like to talk. So this is a new plan we have to implement it this year.
I would suggest, I think that's great. And I think presentation is a huge excuse me, a very good thing. And you talked about animals, for example. I mean, I would suggest taking different things that are part of your curriculum that you're doing. So like if you're teaching history of countries or
Yeah.
history, whatever, that they choose a different country, and then the next week or 2 weeks later, you're in a unit about animals, they choose different animals. And as much as possible, give them the opportunity to do the research. Because again, as we talked about yesterday, if you give them options to research things they're interested in, chances are they're going to do better work. So for example, if you are interested in lions and I'm interested in snakes, right?
Yeah.
And the goal is to learn about each of the different species, but also the goal is actually learning how to research and how to write a report.
Exactly.
Then you're either way, but because I like snakes, I'm going to do a much better, I'm going to be more interested rather than if you told me I had to do lions.
Exactly, because we want in science, we have just like animal classification. And then if I ask them, okay, learn about animal classification, I would do different things. For example, it's nothing to do with the science. It's something you have to search and then talk about the animals that you want to talk about. So this is an engagement, encourage the student to do the research. And with the kids for grade 1, we will help the kids to get information, to go to library, for example, reading a few sentences about it. And for upper grade, the IT will help the student to make a PowerPoint presentation. But for lower grade, it's not possible just to talk about and then memorize information. And other question, Lamia.
I did get a question in my email too that about textbooks.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mr. Norman, just let me modify it a bit about how managing the students and the shape of the class. Is it according to their levels, according to their interest, needs? So how can we manage the activities and how can we manage the students at the same time? According to their gender, according to their interest? So this is my question. And what Montessori suggests?
Well, again, going back to the model of the traditional Montessori classroom, managing the curriculum and the students is essentially the same thing. Like your goal, and I'm not suggesting it necessarily for this year, but ultimately the goal is to be able to have a classroom where you as the teacher, you are giving lessons, the kids have an expectation of what they're supposed to be doing. And so while you're giving lessons, the other kids are working. So you're giving lessons to one group, the other kids are working. So you don't have to feel like you need to manage the classroom. That's the biggest thing I think that philosophically and in practice, you all need to get to a place, and it's challenging right now, where you don't feel like your number one job as a teacher is to manage the children's behavior. You need to design the classroom and implement certain strategies around giving them work so that they work and you're not constantly trying to redirect their behavior. And again, remember what those lessons look like. And again, your classrooms are different than what we're talking about. But if you have 25 kids or 30 kids, you're giving small lessons. The other kids, depending on what level, are working through their daily work plan or their weekly work plan, choosing work on their own, so that way you can give the lesson. And then when you finish with that group, they go back to the work plans, and then you're going on to giving new lessons. So you're not trying to just manage the class. You're managing, you're managing the class, but you're not just managing behavior or curriculum. It's all one sort of combined thing. Yeah. And in your case, again, what I think that you need to do is you need to try to move towards that model of giving them work that they can do on their own. I think that's the single biggest challenge you all have, because when I've been there in the past, I've seen that a teacher may be working with 2 kids and then the rest of the kids don't know what they're supposed to be doing because they're supposed to be doing math at 8 o'clock to 8:30. So if you're working with 2 kids and you have a class of 20, the other 18 kids are bored and they're sitting there in most cases waiting patiently. So what you need to do is try to change the way that your classrooms are run so that if you're working with 2 kids, the other, another group of 3 kids is working on something else, and 5 kids are working independently on other things. That's what you need to get to. And in order to do that, I think that some things need to change, or there has to be more collaboration between the subject area teachers. So for example, it can't be that the only time they're working on language is when Razan comes in because then he only has an hour to work with all those 20 kids. And so I think that there needs to be a model change so that way, maybe Razan's giving the lesson, but then when the kids are in the other class, they're working on his follow-up work. I think that's what needs to happen to fit the model that you all currently have. Ultimately, my hope for you all, and I believe that the hope of the administration, is that you have a fully implemented Montessori school. Just being realistic and understanding the challenges, and I've told this to Shalal and Sangar, is that's not going to happen overnight. So we really need to try to be realistic that you're not going to be able to do what I'm talking about right now. But if you can make baby steps towards that every year, including how do we change our classrooms? How do we change our grade levels? Yeah. So I don't know if I answered your question. It's a much bigger question than just here's the magic wand.
Yeah, I agree, completely agree with you.
Yeah, and then one of the questions that came up that I got, I can't remember from whom, last night or this morning in my email was, what about textbooks? And so that's a really important thing I want to share with you all, especially in light of the fact that you're not fully trained Montessori teachers. You don't have a full battery of materials. Your classrooms are not perfect. So what about textbooks? Montessorians historically, and again, I told you Montessorians generally don't like the idea of textbooks, right? Yep. They say, oh, that's like literally a bad word. Textbooks and testing are bad words. What I'm going to say, and again, this is my opinion and mine, and it's based on a lot of things really, but if you have textbooks and you don't know how to do Montessori, I like textbooks more because it has structure. So if in the meantime, you can use them and they give you structure and they give your children structure, I think they are better than just trying to like wave a bunch of materials around and trying to expect the kids to learn it. So as we're making this transition, I would support using them. And especially as children get older. And I'm going to give you 2 areas of curriculum that I think are really important, even if you have a strong Montessori team: math and foreign language. So math really needs to follow a scope and sequence of curriculum, right? In Montessori, that is really well defined, especially at the elementary levels. But if you don't know what that is, you don't want to teach kids addition one day and then division another day and then fractions another day, because math should be based on previous knowledge. So for example, you want to teach kids what we would call static addition before we get to dynamic addition. So we want to teach them to add 4 plus 4 before we teach them 4 plus 8, because 4 plus 8 gets into a different concept of carrying. So if you don't know what that scope and sequence of curriculum is, most good textbooks take you through. And so it's built on a scaffolding of knowledge. And the same thing with language. You don't want to teach, if you're trying to talk about English, you don't want to teach really complex concepts in English without knowing basic concepts. So if you as teachers find good textbooks that give you a scope and sequence of curriculum, use those textbooks as you start learning how to use Montessori materials. And then in your classrooms, like let's say you have a textbook and it's teaching fractions, right? You all have the fraction insets. You all have the plastic cutouts of fractions. You can use that textbook for things like follow-up work and questions. What you can do as you start learning to use materials is give the introductory lesson using the materials. So if the work in the textbook is naming fractions, let's use the materials, let's do it. Give the students the lesson so that way as they're using the textbook, they can also use the material. And as you all get more and more comfortable with materials and scope and sequence of curriculum, then you can start backing away from the textbook, but it only makes sense if you're using things correctly. And what I've seen in a lot of Montessori schools around the world is because there's an aversion to textbooks, they will go online, print something from here, and they're like, oh, well, I'm not using textbooks, so it's okay. But so what it is it's essentially the same thing, but instead of being unified in one place, it's a hodgepodge of different resources, and it confuses the kids. The other thing that's nice about textbooks, and I guess I think mostly about math when I'm thinking this, because it's the area where it's most, where I see the biggest critical need. Especially as kids get older and the math gets more complex, the children need to have examples. They need to be able to go back and look at work they did in class, practice lessons the teachers did with them, right? And so if you're just giving them, a worksheet from one website and worksheet from another, and then you're saying, oh, that's Montessori because I'm not using a textbook, they don't have the examples. So I actually advocate for use of textbooks in high schools, even if for nothing else, as a backbone of curriculum. Now, that's just me. And again, most Montessorians have an aversion to textbooks, but I want to repeat, if it gives you structure, I think it's better than really doing a sort of thrown together Montessori program.
Yeah, I agree. This is why I followed your advice, and now we have a really very amazing curriculum from Macmillan, and it's a technology integrated in. So it's amazing that the teacher can monitor the students' performance by creating a class and give them the code, and they will enter the codes, and they would do the playway, just like PlayStation. Once they do level 1, and there are a few questionnaires coming up, they have to solve it in order to go to second level. It's amazing. So we got multiple training by Macmillan. So I agree with you completely. But what we are doing, for example, if the concept is about addition, so it's to give us, as you saw, the scope and sequence. What we are doing, braiding. So take the concept, talking about the addition, using the material from Montessori, and we have a books provided by you explaining how to do that and what kind of activities you're doing. So we have structure, scope and sequence using Montessori material with the technology integrated in. So hopefully this year we can do better and better. And I completely agree with you that if we could implement 10% from Montessori way, we would be very thankful and grateful. But the point that we try to develop year by year, and this is what we need, continuous training by you, advice. Today was really very informative. I love this meeting today because it answered a lot of questions, at least for me, I think for the teacher as well. So I wrote everything. What we would do, teachers, so we would discuss and we'll replay again your points, and then we figure out, for example, did you get answer from the Robin? What kind of things, sir, but come up in between? So we discussing everything, and maybe next week, if you have a time, Robin, then we want to continue with you. Next week, Sunday, is it okay?
Sunday, I'm probably not available. I'm actually.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry, Monday, because you're starting, it's a weekend.
Yeah, we could do Monday at 7 o'clock. How's that?
Yeah, the same. Yeah, this is good. What we can discuss everything on Sunday, replay the video today, and then discuss things that we have it. And if there are any additional questions, then we would ask on Monday.
Okay, then the other thing too is if there are certain areas of curriculum, like if you all say, you know what, we have this material, what I can do is I can go to a different classroom and I can actually get there. And if like if one day you said, I really want to see these four materials, I can go to a classroom and actually show you how to use them. So yeah. So let's plan.
This is amazing. Yeah, I would be so thankful if you show us just like structure what they're doing inside the class. So it's amazing. But I said, okay, shall I ask that? Shall I ask Robin to show us the structure inside the class? Just few minutes. That's more than enough. Yeah. And in between, I will send you the curriculum if you like it.
Yep. So just we'll plan on next Monday And then if you just send me, like, if there's a day that you want me to be in a classroom to show you material, just let me know, because I will go to a different school. I'll go to our other class.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Well, yeah. So wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you all have a wonderful, what day is
Yeah,
it?
it was amazing. Today it was amazing. I don't know. I'm so happy because you answered a lot of important questions that we concerned about it. Am I right, teachers?
Yes, it was really
Yeah,
helpful, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
It was helpful. Yeah. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Mr. Robin.
Thank you so
for
much,
your
Robin,
time.
and see you for your time.
Yep. And
And
I'll
see you on Monday at the same time.
See you on Monday. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
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 See you.
Bye.